For people unfamiliar with you, please tell us your name, what your background is, and really what you've been doing for the last 40 years.
I'm Tom Seyfried, professor of biology at Boston College. We have a research program that deals with gene-environmental interactions. We've been working in the fields of epilepsy, cancer, and lipid storage diseases like Tay-Sachs disease and Sonhoff disease, trying to, in every case, develop new therapies, whether it's a gene therapy or a chemical metabolic therapy. But most of my time recently has been spent on the management and prevention of cancer and the origin, where this disease arises from, and how we're going to deal with the challenge of managing and preventing the disease.
Can you tell us how you got involved in studying cancer specifically?
Well, it started with our work on glycolipids. It turned out many cancer cells have abnormal glycolipids. These are complex lipids on the surface of cells. And I worked in a lab at Yale University that studied glycolipids, mainly on what role they have in biology. And of course, to try to figure out what they might do, you see cancer cells that have very different patterns of these glycolipids. It became more and more interesting for us to investigate tumors and the expression of these glycolipids. So after we built some beautiful models of cancer, and not only that, we looked at human tissue preparations from Yale University, comparing and contrasting. What we were hoping to find is a cancer in the mouse that manifested the same abnormal glycolipid patterns as what we would see in human brain cancer. So I was developing brain tumors in mice with the hope of seeing the same types of glycolipid patterns that we would see in the tissue that I was given from the clinic. So they would collect brain tissue from people with brain cancer. We would isolate and purify the lipids from the human tissue, and then we would compare and contrast the patterns with the brain cancers taken from the mouse. And then we felt that if we could find something similar, perhaps we could develop a therapy and test it in the mouse and then go back to the human. That was where we got started on this whole thing.
What's been the main conclusion of your many years of studying cancer?
Well, as I said at first, it was just more or less collecting data, facts, and things like this. At the same time we were studying the lipids of brain cancer, we also had a very active program in epilepsy. And we were mapping genes for epileptic seizures. And one of my students asked me to go to a meeting in Seattle where they were talking about ketogenic metabolic therapy for epilepsy, because this is one of the few areas at that time where ketogenic diets and these kinds of things were shown to be remarkably effective in managing seizures. So we had developed many models of seizure. And our goal was to map genes and then try to use that information to manage the disease, which never worked out. But my student came back and said, let's put these animals on these ketogenic diets and see what happens, and the seizures disappeared. But then we made a very unique discovery. We found out that it wasn't the diet, it was the calories. You can get the same effect if you just restricted calories. It turns out that most of the kids that do well are calorie restricted. And then we said, what's the mechanism? And it was the lowering of blood sugar and the elevation of ketones, which was the mechanism, which was the characteristics of managing epileptic seizures. And at the same time we were doing all this, we were trying to manage Tay-Sachs disease and lipid storage disease. And a company came to us with a drug that was supposed to stop the accumulation of the lipids in the Tay-Sachs, the brains of the mice that had Tay-Sachs disease. So we noticed that the animals were losing weight when we gave them this drug. Then we for whatever reason, we put the drug on the guys that had the brain tumors just to see if we stopped ganglioside. If we stopped the lipid synthesis, would it stop the growth of the tumor? And lo and behold, it did. So the company got very, very excited because there was a bigger market in the cancer field than there was in the epilepsy field. And we didn't know, we were very naive at the time. We didn't know what was going on. But then one of my associates, Dr. Purna Mukherjee, came to work on the mechanism by which this lipid drug stopped the growth of the tumors. And it turned out that it was causing the food, it was preventing digestion of the food in the gut. And the animals were getting an indirect calorie restriction. So we put in a control group, animals that were fed to match the body weight of the guys that were getting the drug. And the results were the same. The tumors shrunk to the same degree. So it had really nothing to do, as a matter of fact, the tumors, they were both the same shrunken size. One group had the reduced gangliosides and shrunken tumor, and the other group had the shrunken tumor without the reduced gangliosides, without the reduced lipids. So it really wasn't the lipids that was responsible, it was the calorie reduction. So then we said, is this the mechanism that is working by epilepsy? So we just fed mice less food and they stopped seizing as well. So we still don't know the mechanism by which ketogenic diets stop epileptic seizures, but it became very clear why it was working on the tumor, because Otto Warburg had said long ago that it was the glucose that was driving the tumor. So we measured the blood sugar in the animals that got these drugs or calorie restriction, and in both cases it went down. So we said, oh, this could be the mechanism. And we started to investigate this more and more, look deeply into what Otto Warburg had shown. And now more recently, after many, many, many years, we have found that Otto Warburg was in fact correct. We have just defined the missing link in Otto Warburg's theory, which now shows that it's glucose and glutamine that are restricted, that have to be restricted. So it's all come back. And we've brought Warburg back from the dead, so to speak, even though he was one of the most dominant scientists of the 20th century. But we persisted. I always felt that he was right. There was just some missing parts to this, and now we've uncovered these missing parts in his theory. He was absolutely right. He just didn't have all the parts of the theory together. We have now defined this. So his concept of cancer as a mitochondrial metabolic disease was in fact correct. He just didn't know about other aspects that could account for the fermentation, and now we have. So he was in fact the person who originally defined the nature of the disease. He just didn't have all the parts to the puzzle.
If you want to learn how to implement the ketogenic diet and the Press Pulse protocol into your cancer management, just visit school.com/keto for cancer, the new community by our research analyst Johnny Rockermeyer. Within this new community platform, you can connect with other patients and learn from their experiences. You can also just search through the posts other members have already made. You will have access to our classroom section as well, which provides practical advice and tools for the best results. These sections cover all parts of the Press Pulse protocol that you should implement. Starting with the general scientific concepts by Dr. Thomas Seyfried, we will show you how to start the ketogenic diet, including which foods to choose and which to avoid. Additionally, we prepared a list of doctors specialized in metabolic therapy, as well as details about glutamine inhibition and hyperbaric oxygen protocols. So, take a look around at school.com/keto for cancer.
How does fruit affect someone that already has cancer?
I don't know. Okay. Fruit has vitamin C. So why do you eat fruit? Mostly for vitamin C. But if fruit has glucose and sugar, and the tumor cell uses sugar to grow, could you take vitamin C without the sugar and get the real value of the fruit? So I don't know why. Now, what we learned in the epilepsy field, because if you have a little bit of sugar spike, you can trigger a breakthrough seizure in a child. And we knew that because we'd keep these kids stabilized for months, and then they would sneak a cupcake or a drink, and they would immediately have a breakthrough seizure. So it was that fast. So my colleagues in the epilepsy field, Beth Supek, Kenya, and others, found fruits that kids with epilepsy could eat and not spike sugar, and that was grapefruit. So that was one fruit that we knew did not spike sugar. So if one were to want fruit with cancer, I would recommend grapefruit without sugar on it, and then you get the benefit. But apples and oranges and all these other kinds of things are loaded with sugar, and I don't think that would be the best.
Do you recommend a raw, whole food, plant-based diet that has no fruit for treating cancer? So we're speaking about green vegetables, sprouts, seaweed, seeds, nuts, avocados, and raw olive oil?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. It's very ambiguous. Everybody's metabolism is different. As I said, what would that diet do to your blood sugar and your ketones? That's what you have to measure. So it's not clear to me what would happen.
What is the exact research that has brought you to the conclusion that sugar feeds cancer?
Well, that was started by Otto Warburg in the showing that, and then we fed mice different diets that had different amounts of glucose, sugar, and there was a direct relationship between how high the blood glucose was and how fast the tumor grew. And we tested that. So, in fact, we're doing some nice experiments now where we're trying to raise blood sugar as high as we can possibly get it to see whether or not we can accelerate tumor growth. We want to see if there's a particular diet we're trying to find a diet that will allow tumors to grow faster than ever recorded, that anyone could possibly imagine. So now it's just the opposite of what people would think. But if you can show people that there is a particular diet that will accelerate your tumor growth faster than any other diet that we can know of, then that would be good to try to avoid that.
Do you recommend avoiding all sugar all the time?
No, I don't recommend avoiding all sugar all the time. I think that sugar is part of our evolutionary past. We would go for ripe fruits, honey, and these kinds of things. But I think that processed foods that have high nutritionally depleted, high sugar causes systemic inflammation in the body, type 2 diabetes, and a variety of other chronic issues. And I think that contributes in many subtle ways to the different chronic diseases that we have: heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and these kinds of diseases. So people should just be aware that drinking a lot of Coca-Cola, eating a lot of donuts, puts them at risk for systemic inflammation, which then puts them at risk for various chronic diseases. So I think it's probably good to recognize that. So if some people say they don't care, then there's nothing you can really do about it. And the obesity epidemic in the country is a consequence of people having foods that are loaded with high sugar. It's not the high fat. The body can't get fat by eating fat. Fat is either burned or excreted. It's not stored. Sugar is stored as fat. So when you see someone that's obese, that obviously came from the glucose and the sugar molecules that they eat, because that can be converted into fat. But fat is not converted into sugar, for the most part. So the idea here is if you eat high-fat, low-sugar diets, you'll lose weight. And if you eat high glucose, low-fat diets, you're going to gain weight. So you just have to know that, and then you make decisions.
Do you believe the average person is getting accurate, unbiased, scientifically proven information from their oncologist?
Not likely. But it's not the oncologist's fault. The oncologist knows very little about this. They know about how to use certain procedures to treat the disease. They're not trained in medical school to know anything about nutrition. And in fact, if they get anything at all, it's like a half-hour course in their whole medical training. So they're not trained to use food as medicine or know anything about the healing and therapeutic power of different kinds of foods. So I would say at least 90% of oncologists would be unfamiliar with that terrain.
Subsequently, do you believe the average person is getting accurate, unbiased, scientifically proven information from the medical industry as a whole?
No, there's a lot of controversy about this. Unfortunately, from what I read and what I see, the food pyramids and all of these things, they're influenced by special interests to a large degree, which then creates massive confusion on the population. So it's very hard to wade through what's healthy and what's not healthy. But I think a lot of common sense will tell you whether eating broccoli might be less harmful to your body than eating Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, if someone were to substitute every night broccoli for donuts, I think you'll find a difference in physiology after a while. So, but there are a lot of foods that I think are pretty healthy for you or not harmful and things. My field is not nutrition, okay? So you're asking me questions that I can speculate on this stuff, but it's not my field. We're into targeting energy metabolism in cancer cells. And if you eat certain foods, they could be facilitatory, and other foods might be disruptive. So it's hard to say. It's a very complicated area, but the answer to your question is, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation that comes in this industry as the result of inputs from special interest groups that are powerful enough to push their pitch. So, and then the poor person has to try to wade through what they think is the correct information. And that puts a lot of people, so that's why you hear it even at this meeting. Can you eat this? Can you eat that? Do you recommend this to you? I don't recommend anything. I'm not telling anybody what they should do. Just measure your blood sugar ketone index, and that pretty much gives you a snapshot of where you stand. Look at your triglycerides. Look at your ratio of HDL to LDL. If you have imbalances in these metabolites, try changing something and see whether you can bring the metabolites back in their correct zones, and then do it on yourself and see what happens. I know everybody doesn't have the ability to do that. You have to go to some of the clinical chemistry labs. But I think there are places that you can go and get a quick blood reading on your HDL, LDL. Cholesterol is not a marker for this. Triglycerides are a more important marker for cardiovascular disease than is cholesterol. The ratio of cholesterol, HDL, and LDL is important, I think. But many of the other, having low insulin levels, low glucose levels is good. Insulin is a provocative hormone. It's a very sensitive, powerful hormone that should be in very low quantities, rather than insulin insensitivity puts you at risk for cardiovascular disease, dementia, all kinds of things. And you keep that in a low ratio by avoiding. If you have diets that are high in fat and high in sugar, those are the ones that put you at great risk, because the sugar and the fat work off each other. But if you have a diet that's low in sugar and higher in fat, you lower triglycerides. We've seen this ourselves. Fish oil, we were shocked to find out how powerful fish oil was, actually. You can lower triglycerides with fish oil. So we did some of these studies, but it was only in relationship to trying to manage cancer or seizure or epilepsy.
Do you believe the average person is getting accurate, unbiased, scientifically proven information from the FDA and other governmental agencies?
Well, here's the problem. There's not even a consensus on the part of the scientists as to what's appropriate or inappropriate. Okay, there's a lot of controversy, even among major scientific centers. So how is the FDA going to be able to make a correct decision when the information that they receive itself is not settled? So, this is one of the issues. But, most people, if they understand things, people know that There are ways to live a healthy lifestyle, and there are ways to live a less than healthy lifestyle. And I think a lot of it is common sense. And people read into so many things in such a deep way, and he said this, she said that, they said this, they said that. It's all upside down. Well, I'll just do whatever I'm going to do. I'm going to continue to do what I was always doing, which may or may not be good. So it's a very hard, it's not easy.
Is it possible to prevent getting cancer?
Yeah, it's very possible to prevent getting cancer. The problem is we live in an environment that makes it very difficult to implement what must be done to prevent cancer. All cancers start from damage to mitochondrial respiration in a particular cell, in a particular part of the body. So how do you prevent damage to the mitochondria of the cells that ultimately elicit? So if you metabolize ketone bodies, that protects mitochondria from the development of reactive oxygen species, what ultimately leads to disorder and entropy. Entropy is the second law of thermodynamics, which is disorder. We all die from entropy. We don't live forever because our bodies break down. That's called disorder. Entropy, second law of thermodynamics. So in order to delay entropy, you keep your body and your energy metabolism as clean as possible. So if you burn ketone bodies as opposed to sugar, which is pyruvic acid basically, most foods come down to pyruvic acid, you can delay entropy, and that will allow you to live longer. The problem is most people don't want to do that, and they don't know about that, and therefore what I just told you is not known by the majority of people. So yeah, so you can prevent cancer by keeping your mitochondria healthy. How do you do that? You have them burn ketones. How do you burn ketones? You do water-only therapeutic fasting or very small amounts of these keto-type diets, small amounts. Blood sugar goes down, ketones go up, cells burn ketones, entropy is reduced, and you keep your cells healthier and unlikely will get cancer. Cancer comes from damage to the respiration. You protect the respiration, you don't get cancer. But the cancer risk goes down precipitously. Who can do this? Primitive peoples on the planet, that Eskimos, Africans in the jungles, and maybe in the rainforests. These are the kinds of people that live a very pristine life. Of course, they die from infections and these other kinds of things, but they generally don't get cancer. Cancer was unheard of in some of these primitive populations. It's an interesting point. If you look at humans and chimps and gorillas are primates, and we share we have a very close genetic composition. Our genome and the chimp and the gorilla's genome is very similar. You know, we all differ by a few percentage here. So here's the situation. Humans have cancer, a lot of cancer. Chimps and gorillas have very little cancer. How is it possible that these three species, all primates, all similar genetically, could have such a different rate of cancer? Chimps and gorillas don't have the kinds of cancers that humans have, and yet we're all very similar genetically. Well, what do chimps and gorillas eat? They eat their natural foods, leaves and fruits and vegetables and these kinds of things. They eat some meat, they eat some, at least the chimps do, and you look at their diets and lifestyle, chimps and gorillas have a different diet and lifestyle than we do. They're eating their natural foods. Our natural foods were berries and nuts and other animals. We've deviated so far from what we were traditionally eating before civilization, and therefore we put all of ourselves at risk for cancer. The control experiment would be to take chimpanzees and give them Coca-Cola, Dunkin's Donuts, smoking, and all the things that we do, and I would be shocked if they didn't get a whole bunch of cancer. And you look at the dogs. Okay, dogs evolved from wolves. If you go to the wild, wolves rarely get cancer. Wolves aren't running around with all. Domesticated dogs Cancer is the #1 killer of domesticated dogs. So what are the dogs eating? They're eating the same crap that we're eating, right? The artificial grains put in the dog foods and all these different kinds of things. So they're eating abnormal foods in relationship to their evolutionary past. We as a species are eating foods that are not consistent with our evolutionary past. The consequence is cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, dementia, all these different things. So clearly we have the organisms, we have these already shown that, but who is going to go back and live on elephant bone marrow and elk and buffalo, rarely cooked? We're not going to do that. So we just have to be aware that the foods in our environment are putting us at risk for cancer. And the food industry are magnificent in tweaking the tastes of these foods to make them extremely desirable. I mean, nobody can deny that these foods taste great. And so it's hard to deviate from the environment when everything tastes and looks so good. The gorilla and the chimp are not tested like this. I don't know what would happen if you gave them pizza every day and Coke. I'm sure they would eat it, and they probably like it, and they would get fat and they would have cancer. So it's just you have to put things into evolutionary perspective. If you don't know the evolution of the organisms on the planet or how we all got here today, then you have difficulty understanding these concepts. But when you understand biological evolution, then you understand the situation we're in today.
Is it possible to reverse cancer once you already have it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if it's reverse the cancer or killing it or exterminating it. There's two different things. So these tumor cells that are growing out of control all of a sudden revert back to the normal cells that they were. Is that reversing? So I have this cell that used to come from your liver, your colon. It's growing angrily, creating an inflamed microenvironment. And then all of a sudden, it's going to change that whole characteristic and come back and become a member, a disciplined member of the society of cells. I don't know that. However, there are things that people do that they had cancer and it disappears, gone completely. Now, did the cells morph back into some disciplined group and just enter back into the organs? Or were they just up and died and they were just eliminated from the body? Either way, it was gone. More likely, they died and they were removed then they actually turn back into becoming normal, despite the fact that they have all these broken chromosomes and all these things that they would have, making it hard to imagine. However, we're now learning that many of the normal cells in our body have all of these different genetic abnormalities, and they seem to be okay. They're not growing out of control. So it's a good question. I don't know if it's possible to reverse. I think it's possible to have what we call what do they call it? Elimination, disappearance of the cancer. I think that there's a lot of ways that people all of a sudden they had a lot of cancer, and all of a sudden it went away. Those are the people we should be looking at. What did you do? I think Kelly Turner looked at some of these kinds of people. I think that's where the focus should be. What was it that you did that made your cancer resolve? And in every case, it seems to be some radical change in diet. So we need to look more into that rather than what we're doing currently.
What do you believe are the most powerful steps you can take to prevent yourself from getting cancer?
Well, avoid risk factors. Everybody knows that. If you smoke less or not at all. If you're working in an environment that creates systemic inflammation, try to reduce that. You can always, as I said before, your mitochondria get damaged, so you try to keep your mitochondria healthy by allowing them to burn ketone bodies, which requires fasting. That will. Bottom line, what causes cancer? Viruses, inflammation, radiation, carcinogens. So obviously, if they're the risk factors, you don't want to be working in an environment or existing in an environment that puts you at tremendous risk for causing damage to the mitochondria. I think that's the best way to prevent it. Avoid the risk factor, if you can. And I know people, they roll the dice and say it's not going to be me. Yet they do the, me too. I'm guilty of this too. I mean, I'm living in a society. We're all living in this society. Although I don't swim in contaminated water, I try. And even when you know what you're supposed to do, sometimes you still do it. You know, it's just you hope you're not going to be the one. But if you get cancer, then you really need to know what to do. But there's a lot of ways to prevent it. But you're living in an industrial society, and therefore you put yourself, just every day you get up, you walk out of the house, you put yourself at risk. So you just don't know. There's just too many variables in the environment. So what do? You just try to keep your mitochondria as healthy as you can.
Based on all your research and all the best scientific evidence that exists today, what do you believe is the most powerful steps, or are the most powerful steps you can take to reverse and recover from cancer if you already have it?
Well, reverse and recover from cancer. I think that a metabolic approach is probably the best way you can manage. I don't like to know, all we can say is how well you can manage the disease so it doesn't impact negatively on your life. One of the ways, in my mind, to do that is to avoid therapies that put you at risk for bodily harm. Okay. As I said, you have cancer. Okay, well, you have to do something to manage it. Because it will kill you if you do nothing. So you have several options to manage the disease. To try to manage, I use the word manage rather than resolve. If you manage it long enough, maybe it will resolve, you know. Okay, so I would say, in my mind, I would try, me, not anyone else, avoid therapeutic interventions that would put me at risk for damage to any part of my body, right? So I would not take any toxic drug. I would not, under most conditions, unless there was a massive amount of evidence of therapeutic success, I would not take radiation. Unless there was a very high, unless there was very good scientific evidence to say that 95% you will not have any adverse effects, and that there's a 95% that this disease of this type will not recur. Anything less than that, I would be very cautious, because there are ways to manage the disease without toxic. We don't want to treat any person with the remote possibility of causing that disease to get worse or to harm the normal cells of the body. Doing that speaks to the lack of knowledge on the part of the practitioner. They just don't know that there are other ways. So managing the disease long-term without toxicity is the strategy that I think most people, I would take, and most people would probably want to take with the right evidence.
Do you recommend a whole food plant-based diet for treating cancer?
I don't know. It sounds like it would be effective. I saw, evidence from the Hippocrates Health Institute with people who did that, and they were able to survive and seemed like they were doing well. I think it probably would be healthy. I think it's if it targets the glucose availability, I think it would be very healthy. Besides having all the nutrients in there. I think in general, I would say that's probably a good strategy. Will it be as powerful as a strategy where you do that plus use specific drugs that are non-toxic that go after the tumor more efficiently? I don't know. We haven't done the kinds of experiments that you're talking about. So you'd have to have standard of care, radiation and chemo, plant-based diet with radiation and chemo. we have to have the groups of people that would want to participate in this. And as far as I know, this has never been done. So the answer to the question is I don't know.
Do most oncologists think sugar should be avoided by cancer patients?
It's a hard question because I just get a lot of comments back that the oncologists might not know about that. And it's hard to know unless you specifically ask them. That's a question for oncologists. If you brought in 100, or you can do a survey, what do you know about sugar and cancer? Just ask them. I don't know. I only hear from some cancer patients who say the oncologists don't think anything like that could be involved. So my question is two things you can ask an oncologist to get a more accurate answer. And that is, do they understand the Warburg theory of cancer? And do they know that cancer needs fermentable fuels to grow? And if the answer to either one of those is, I didn't know that, or I never heard of that, then you have a problem. What I find is that so many people are being treated for a disease by individuals that have a profound lack of knowledge on the biology of the disease they're treating. The ultimate result of this is a crisis of 1,600 people a day dying from the disease. It's not their fault. They're never trained in medical schools to know anything about this. So they are following the guidelines of their discipline. And the discipline itself is fundamentally off course with respect to understanding the biology of the disorder. Consequently, 1,600 people a day are dying from the disease as the result of this. Oh, what's going on is it's the theoretical framework under which you work the disease, okay? So if you consider the disease a genetic disease, then what the establishment is doing is treating dysregulated cell growth because the gene mutations cause the cells to grow out of control. The gene mutations are causing that. The alternate theory is no, it's the mitochondria, it's the metabolism of the cell. The gene mutations occur as a secondary effect. They're not a primary effect. So again, it comes, let me give you an example to put it into a more simplistic example. There was a time in the history of our planet and our educational system where people thought that the sun revolved around the Earth. And this was called the geocentric theory of the organization of planets in the solar system. Not only the sun, but the Mars and Venus and all the planets in the solar system revolved around the Earth. And the Earth was the center of the solar system. Copernicus did mathematical tests and found, no, that it appeared that the sun was the center of the solar system and the Earth and the planets revolved around the sun. And that was called the heliocentric model of the organization of the planets. But the Catholic Church and many other learned organizations felt it was the Earth that was the center of the solar system, based on a dogmatic view that humans were the prime species in the world, in the universe, and that everything had to revolve around our home. Until these mathematicians challenged that idea, and Galileo built a telescope to confirm what in a more certain way, what Copernicus was saying. And others like Bruno, Giordano Bruno, was burned at the stake for supporting the Copernican Galileo argument for the heliocentric model. So when you have powerful organizations, at that time it was the Catholic Church, defining a way that the system should be viewed, then you have massive misinformation and problems. Now, of course, the heliocentric, geocentric theory was not responsible for the death of 1,600 people a day. It was more of an academic argument in the supremacy of our species in the universe. Now we have a gene theory versus a mitochondrial metabolic theory. And the consequences of that misunderstanding is the result of these massive numbers of people dying and suffering all over the world. The new immunotherapies that are being designed, and you hear about on the TV every night, are based on the gene theory of cancer. Now, if cancer is not a genetic disease, how effective will those therapies be in managing the disease for the majority of people? The data are coming out that many of those therapies will kill you faster than the disease itself. Okay? There's many papers being published on this. But how can we change this if people are dogmatically viewing that cancer as a genetic disease just as they viewed the geocentric theory of the universe? So we're up against massive special interest groups to perpetuate a mission of treating a disease by procedures that are unrelated to the origin of the disease. And there we have the 1,600 people a day dying, and it's getting worse. And we know from the prospectuses of companies that we're expecting massive numbers of new cancer cases and more cancer in the next decade and the future decades. So this is a major problem. So you have to ask the scientists, why do you have this? And they'll debate with me and argue just as strongly that cancer is a genetic disease based on certain observations. And then you have to say, well, how do you account for this and that? How do you account for the nuclear transfer experiments? How do you account for the fact that we have these driver genes in normal cells? How do you account for the fact that some tumor cells have no mutations? They can't account for this. Just as they couldn't account for the epicycles that said that the Earth was the center of the solar system. So how long will it take for people to come to understand this? I don't know. I don't know how many more deaths, how much more suffering we have to endure for an organization to say, okay, we made a mistake. Okay? Very powerful groups are holding to this viewpoint. How long will it change? People say, well, you have to wait for the strong guys to die off and the young people will come in and change the paradigm. So we're going to sacrifice all these little kids, all these people, just because a few obstinate people who haven't been able to grasp the understanding of the biology. So this is what we have to do. This is the way it is today. You know, of course that's the case, but yeah, but you know, I don't want to, because if one could make a lot of money understanding that cancer is a metabolic disease, while at the same time keeping people alive in a healthier state, it's the business model has not yet been developed to figure out how you're going to make a lot of money on this. So, but that shouldn't dissuade people from saying, why don't we try it? Is there a humanitarian? So if you're understanding that this is not a genetic disease and your therapies are based on that, you're treating people, then we're dealing with an issue of morality. It's immoral, okay? Now, you know, there's ethics and there's morality. And I think these are the issues that people need to come to the grips. And as I said in the meeting, the problem is we fragmented the cancer societies into so many different individual societies. Everybody thinks cancer is 100 different diseases, when in fact it's a singular disease. So as long as all the foundations are separated, as I said, there should be united foundations of cancer, just like there's the United States of America. So once they put all their efforts together, I think you're going to see the change. And it's going to happen real quick because people don't want to be done. People want to live. The bottom line is people want to live. They don't want to be poisoned and irradiated to make themselves better, right? And now we know that there are many ways that we can keep people alive longer and a higher quality of life. And where are the clinical trials? Who does the clinical trials? Who sponsors the clinical trials? Why is the federal government locked in? Why are we having pharmaceutical companies join oncology groups at top medical schools? I mean, we have a lot of problems here. So we have to go back. It's a moral issue. What side of morality are you on? Okay, ask the person. If you think cancer is a genetic disease and there's strong evidence to say it's not, and you want to perpetuate a therapy based on a false understanding, what side of morality are you standing on? Right? These are very difficult situations here. But ultimately, we're not going to go any further. We're going to continue in this vortex of death and suffering and massive profits. But I don't think I think if someone knew how to make money on what we're talking about, that it would shift real quick. And the food industry is aware of this, and they're trying to do what they can do. But, you know, it's like anything else. How am I going to make a buck on this? And I want to feel good that I'm not only making money, but I'm also helping people. That's the best of both worlds. You make a profit on it, and you know you're really keeping people alive, which everybody can feel good about that. Nobody's saying you shouldn't make money on things. I'm not saying people should do this. But, you know, the idea is, how do we work a business model around the new understanding of what cancer is? And therefore, the chairs are rearranged. And I think that's going to happen. It has to happen. Because the horse is now out of the barn. You know, people are starting to really question seriously this whole cancer stuff, You can only fool so many of the people for so long. Remember what the old thing, you can't fool all the people all the time. People are realizing, how come we're dying? Everybody's senators are dying. The wealthiest people in the world, Paul Allen, dead in 2 weeks from therapy for cancer that the doctors were optimistic. He's the wealthiest guy in the world, him and Gates, right? Blake Nordstrom of the Nordstrom, he goes in, my doctors are enthusiastic, and he's dead in 2 weeks. Nobody should die in 2 weeks from being a healthy guy, going in for a therapy for cancer and dying in 2 weeks from a therapy that's based on a gene-based, and this is why these people are dying. They're using therapies that are not based on what the disease is. So you want to know what's going on in the cancer industry? Read the Wall Street Journal. My students read it. I show them all the time that this is what's the real world, not the textbooks, not the labs. It's the Wall Street Journal. And you can see what company is moving into what space, who's making the best drug, who's living, who's dying, why the stocks went up, why the stocks went down. It's all related to the newest drug, and most of these drugs are based on the gene theory of cancer, so none of them in the long run are ever going to be. And then we have another problem called financial toxicity, which is another moral issue. One of my students just wrote a big paper on this. So some of these poor people, they get these drug therapies, and they have to pay $100,000, and these are people living on the edge. They don't have the money. Next thing you know, their marriage falls apart, they commit suicide, they go into bankruptcy. It's a terrible depression that they go into, and it's called financial toxicity. It's immoral to take a person who has very little money and charge him $400,000, $100,000 for a cancer treatment that ultimately kills him, and after he dies, the bills are passed on to his loved ones that are in it. This is nuts. And this is what's happening in this situation, all based on a misunderstanding of the biology of the disease.
Are you passionate about the groundbreaking and heroic research of Dr. Thomas Seyfried on metabolic therapy and cancer? So are we. That's why we've created something special for you, in collaboration with Johnny Rockermeyer, a German book publisher and translator. Introducing our collection of meticulously crafted books that distill the essence of Dr. Seyfried's work. Dive into the science and discoveries. These summary books are your gateway to understanding the intricate world of metabolic ketogenic therapy in a clear, concise, and engaging way. Whether you're new to the subject or a seasoned enthusiast, our books offer insights that can change your life. Ready to explore this transformative knowledge? Visit our website at www.cancerasametabolicdisease.com to get your copy. You can buy the ebook there directly and the paper book via the provided links. Here's the best part. A portion of every purchase goes directly to support Dr. Thomas Seyfried's groundbreaking research. That's why the direct ebook purchase is the best option to donate as much as possible. You can see all of the donations Mr. Rockermeyer has already made at www.ketoforcancer.net. That's right, when you buy our books, you're not just investing in your own knowledge, you're also contributing to the future of cancer research. Help us make a difference. Together, we can drive change and save lives.
No, it's because I said the foundations are fragmented. They're not united. They're not united. You have to go to Washington. You have to raise hell. This is the only thing. This is the only way things get done. Otherwise, they just perpetuate the problem. I don't know how your listeners are going to take that. Hey,
You know what? We call it the Real Truth About Health Conference for a reason, and we're here to look for unbiased opinions and expert science. So
yeah, well,
it is what it is.
It is, yeah, it is what it is.
Do most oncologists think fruit should be avoided by cancer patients?
I don't know what oncologists think. It's hard to know what they're going to say. Every oncologist would have a different opinion. They should know whatever they tell the patient. Is it going to help them manage their disease without toxicity? Therefore, you have to. It's a shame that we have to go to people that are unfamiliar with these concepts. I mean, you should be talking to oncologists and say they should be the ones, not me. Why am I doing this? Why am I sitting here when they should be sitting here? It would be horrible if you have an oncologist sitting here and he argues everything that I'm saying. He says, "Oh no, give them as much sugar as possible. Sugar doesn't cause cancer." Well, sugar doesn't cause cancer, but if you have cancer, sugar can make it grow faster. So people go overboard with a lot of this stuff. Okay, So they're going to eat, only plants, and they're going to not eat any sugar, because sugar does not cause cancer. Okay, our body makes sugar from gluconeogenesis. We make sugar from carbohydrates that we eat, from amino acids. Very hard to. You can take two glycerol backbones from fatty acids, put them together, and you get a glucose molecule. But you burn energy to make energy. Sugar is pure energy. You don't have to burn energy to get energy from sugar, or glutamine. Glutamine is a pure energy source, an amino acid. But oncologists should know that there are certain things that work that shouldn't be done, or put patients at risk for having a tumor recurrence. And it's unfortunate that a lot of these guys don't know that, and I don't blame them. I mean, they're only products of the system. They've only been trained to do certain things. It's not their fault that no one came in and told them, hey, this is not good. They're just trained to do what they do. Now, some of them are starting to recognize what they've been doing is wrong. I've had some physicians come to me that were oncologists their whole life, had retired, and some were weeping, and knowing their whole life that what they were doing to these patients was not the best thing, but this is what they were trained to do, and this is what they did to earn a living, only to realize later on, because they didn't have the real nuts and bolts of why they were doing what they were doing was so horrific in the light of what we know now and what Warburg knew. So it's a pretty much of a very, very unsettling to some people once they come to understand. And then there's some people who are so disturbed by this, they don't want to understand it. They don't want to feel that their whole life's work was putting people at risk for recurrence or even killing them. And that's a very hard thing to do. When you're a healthcare professional, your job is to heal people and make them well, and the system told you to be treated with chemicals and radiation and things that make the opposite. It's very hard. And if I were a physician and somebody told me what I'm telling them now, I'd be devastated knowing this kind of stuff. But hey, the facts are the facts. You just got to deal with it.
Why have you come to different conclusions than many other people that speak about cancer? Why should anyone believe your conclusions are more accurate than what the mainstream accepted view on cancer is?
Well, I mean, we went back and we looked at where the concept came from. That we uncovered, we did experiments, we reevaluated data in light of two competing theories. So you have facts. The facts of the disease are clear. They've been published in thousands and thousands of research articles. Some of these are clear facts. No one denies the dysregulated cell growth of cancer. No one denies that cancer cells have mutations. No one denies that the metabolism of cancer cells is abnormal. The question is, how do you put all those facts together in a understandable organization? And you have two main competing theories to explain the facts. As I said, you have the mitochondrial metabolic theory or the somatic mutation theory. And you go back and find what was the origin of those ideas from the very beginning. Who were the people that actually defined these things, that made the world the way it is today? Otto Warburg was the most powerful proponent of the mitochondrial metabolic theory, and he had very compelling evidence to support that. Theodor Boveri, a German scientist, looked at cells under the microscope in the sea urchin and saw abnormal chromosomes and guessed that this might be happening to cancer cells. He had no clue about cancer, knew nothing about cancer, and he just speculated that maybe cancer is due to a bunch of chromosomal imbalances. And when DNA was discovered, they found chromosomal imbalances. But what I did was I put together all the experiments that showed that you can take cancer nuclei and put them in with chromosomal imbalances and mutations and put them in a new cytoplasm with new mitochondria, and you don't get cancer. And if you take the nucleus of the normal cell and put it in the cytoplasm of the tumor cell, you got cancer. So it was clear that Otto Warburg's theory can better explain the origin of the disease than can the gene theory. Now, this information is not known to the majority of oncologists. They don't have time to read it. They're working every day in their office, hundreds of cancer patients coming through. They don't have time, like I did, to sit down and evaluate thousands and thousands of research articles in light of two competing theories. So if there's a dogmatic view and everybody thinks it's one way, nobody ever thinks of the other way. So you have to present the data to support the other way, and then you have to let people come to their own conclusion. And they have to look at it and debate it and talk about it. And that's the way things will move forward. So my view, I didn't make this up myself. You know, I look back at the people who actually did these things. I reevaluated all of the things that we're doing in light of two competing theories. And and anyone with a rational capability, and I find that lay people, students and lay people who are not indoctrinated by a particular viewpoint, see and compare and contrast, and they come, wow, it's clear that this can explain, much clearer. But people who have been indoctrinated into a dogmatic view cannot accept those findings, regardless. So you think the people that should can't, because they're locked into a dogmatic view. The person that's not linked to a dogma can compare and contrast in a more unbiased way and come, yeah, makes complete sense. So this is why we have this great skill. The lay people understand what I'm talking about better than the scientists do. And the scientists control the top medical schools, and the top medical schools are beholden to an industry that supports one viewpoint. And there you have this. So the lay people on one side and the medical establishment on the other side. So something has to give. Either we're going to be dictated to by an organization that doesn't understand the biology, and we're all going to be treated in one particular way, or there's going to be some sort of a revolution that's going to take over and say, listen, we've got to discuss this, and we have to do it in a rational way, and we have to let the dust settle, and let's start trying these other options. Because you don't have a dog in the fight, right? And then when you have a loved one that does get cancer, the first thing you do is you run off to the top, and Sloan Kettering or Dana-Farber, MD Anderson, Moffitt Cancer Center. You're going to go to these places, and you're going to think those folks know what they're doing, right? They're trained not to kill you. They're trained to use radiation and chemo at doses that are not going to try to kill you, but they bring you close to death with the hope that your body is going to recover. They don't know about the biology of cancer. And if they do, they're calling the genes, they say the gene mutations cause the abnormal metabolism rather than the reverse. So you have to recognize, you know, I'm not, if I had some Bert Vogelstein here, he'd be saying, no, there's the evidence. You know, the evidence says the genes. But what about the nuclear transfer experiments? Did you ever address the nuclear? No, I didn't address those experiments. Well, you got to address everything. I address everything. I look at every fact of this disease and weigh them in light of the two competing theories. Who does that, right? So all I did was just bring this to light and let the world determine where the dust settles. Let other people, let the lay people weigh in, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to get blasted by this stuff. So they're not interested in making a lot of money. They just want to save their ass, basically. I want something that's going to help me. And if you're the top guy and you're telling me this, okay, I'm going to follow your method. And it's deceitful. If the guy really, now it's not, if he doesn't understand, how can he give you the right information? So you follow the core of what the standard of the field is. And as I said, we got 1,600 people a day dying from this disease, which is unconscionable. And it's every country in the world, the same thing. All people dying, so many maimed and mutilated and devastated. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just, you think about it, it even gets worse and bigger than you ever thought in your life. It's brutal. No, I think the change could come from people recognizing, coming to know that this is a disease that can be managed. We've seen a lot of evidence without toxicity or minimal toxicity, using procedures and strategies that have been looked at over millennia, but now better organized. And I think that the private organizations, the foundations, need to get their act together. And the sad thing about a lot of these foundations is that they give money out and things, and you look at their scientific advisory board, because lay people say, well, I have to go to the experts. They're going to make the decisions. And you look at, I did this. I looked at the scientific advisory board for the Susan Komen Foundation, and they're all they're all gene guys. Everybody thinks, every one of those guys on the Susan Komen thing, cancer is a genetic disease. So how are you going to raise all this money for breast cancer and expect to get anything done? It's just amazing. So you look at the scientific advisory boards for all the major foundations, and they all think cancer is a genetic disease. So where are you going to get the progress? So the very foundations that should be helping the laypersons are actually inadvertently in the camp of the people who think the cancer is something other than what it is. It's unbelievable. I could go on. I'm just touching the surface of this thing. When you've spent as many hours and years investigating the depths of this disease as the way I have, I could sit here for 3 days telling you things that you would be shocked about, that we know about on this whole thing.